In the heart of northern Italy, a teenage girl left the gym one late November afternoon and simply vanished. What began as a routine errand turned into one of the country's most haunting mysteries. The story would soon captivate a nation, unraveling like a detective thriller no screenwriter could have crafted. Yara Gambara was born on May 21, 1997, in Brembate di Sopra, a small, serene town nestled just outside Milan. Known for its medieval charm and quiet streets, this sleepy community of around 7,000 souls was the kind of place where nothing bad ever happened, or so it seemed. Yara came from a close-knit family rooted in the town for generations. With an older sister and two younger brothers, she was the kind of girl everyone knew. Friendly, grounded, and passionate about gymnastics. Her second home was the local sports center just a few hundred yards away, where she trained regularly. On the evening of November 26, 2010, 13-year-old Yara told her parents she was heading to the gym, not for a workout, but just to drop off a stereo for her coach. It was around 5:15 p.m. when she stepped out the door, promising to be back in about an hour. No one thought twice. After all, it was a quick walk, and Brembate di Sopra was considered safe. But as the clock ticked past 7 p.m., a quiet worry crept into the house. Yara was never this late. Her mother called her cell phone at 7:11 p.m. It went straight to voicemail. That was the moment everything changed. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support means a lot to us and helps us grow. A huge thank you to everyone who's been watching. The case quickly escalated beyond the limits of the small town. Just 7 miles away, in a larger neighboring city, the file landed on the desk of seasoned detective Letizia Ruggeri. Known for her sharp instincts and calm under pressure, Ruggeri wasted no time. She dispatched officers to Brembate di Sopra to initiate a ground search and called in the military police for reinforcement. The first step was to reconstruct Yara's final known movements. After interviewing her parents, investigators went straight to the gym. There, her coach confirmed that Yara had shown up around 5:30 p.m., just as she'd told her family. Friends remembered seeing her too, smiling, chatting, stretching, and doing a few light exercises before heading out. Everything about the visit had seemed routine. Then came a vital detail. At 6:44 p.m., Yara had sent a text message to a friend. That was the last anyone heard from her. Based on that timestamp, investigators narrowed the window of her disappearance to the short walk between the sports center and her home. Somewhere in that narrow stretch, Yara vanished. Police units fanned out across the town. One group swept the streets, others knocked on doors, canvassed witnesses, and reviewed whatever CCTV footage they could find. Some witnesses near the gym reported seeing a girl matching Yara's description, speaking with two men near a red car. But nothing definitive came from those leads. No proof it was her. They turned the sports complex upside down. Nothing. Not a single trace. Meanwhile, local officers, military police, and firefighters pushed deeper into fields, along footpaths, even combing the riverbank that sliced through the town. Volunteers poured in. Still, Yara was nowhere to be found. Detective Ruggeri brought in the canine units next. The dogs took the scent from Yara's belongings and began tracking. But instead of moving toward her home, they led searchers in the opposite direction, toward the neighboring town of Mapello. That set off alarm bells. Ruggeri ordered a trace on Yara's cell phone. The data confirmed it. At 6:49 p.m., just 5 minutes after her last text, her phone pinged a tower in Mapello. That made one thing chillingly clear: Yara didn't go there on foot. Someone had taken her. The trail stopped cold there. With no further signs and no body, the investigation now pivoted to two possibilities. Either Yara had been abducted, or less likely, she had run away. But that theory fell apart quickly. She'd made plans to meet a friend the next day. That last text didn't read like the words of a girl planning to disappear. Still, every stone had to be turned. Detectives spoke to everyone close to Yara. Family, friends, neighbors. No red flags. Nothing suggested she was unhappy or in trouble. As a precaution, Ruggieri ordered wiretaps on the phones of family members and dozens of people in their circle. She then took an extraordinary step. She requested the location data of every phone that had been in Mapello on the night Yara disappeared. It was a long shot, but if the kidnapper had a phone on them, it would have pinged the same tower. The scope of that search was massive. Over 15,000 phones had connected to towers in the area that evening. Investigators began the painstaking work of sifting through each one. A dedicated team was formed to monitor thousands of numbers that raised any suspicion. While the search continued on the ground, day after day passed without answers. No new clues, no sightings, no breakthroughs. As weeks dragged into months, Ruggieri's confidence in the physical search began to wane. Her hopes rested on the mountain of cell phone data and the belief that somewhere in that list was the key to unlocking what happened to Yara. The wiretaps produced little at first, just hours upon hours of ordinary conversations, irrelevant chatter, and dead ends. But then, weeks into the operation, something unexpected surfaced. In one recorded call, a man's voice broke through the noise. "Forgive me, Lord. I didn't kill her." The phrase sent a jolt through the investigation team. The man was quickly identified as Mohammed Fikri, a Moroccan construction worker who lived in Mapello, the same town where Yara's phone had last pinged. It was a direct link to the only tangible clue they had. But the officers monitoring the calls had been working with a significant delay. There were simply too many recordings to process in real time. Fikri's call was from 3 days earlier, and by the time they flagged it, he was already gone. He was on a ship bound for Morocco. To the investigators, the timing and context were too suspicious to ignore. Acting quickly, Italian authorities coordinated to intercept the vessel. Fikri was detained on board and brought back to Italy under suspicion of involvement in Yara's disappearance. As this was unfolding, police made another discovery. Fikri's car had a blood-stained mattress in the trunk. It was seized and rushed to the lab, where forensic experts conducted urgent tests. But the result threw another wrench into the case. It wasn't Yara's blood. In fact, it wasn't even human. Then came the crushing blow. A more accurate analysis of Fikri's phone call, translated properly from his native language, revealed a devastating mistake. The chilling phrase that had alarmed investigators was a mistranslation. With further checks confirming his alibi, it became clear. Fikri had nothing to do with the crime. The police had no choice but to release him. By now, the case had gripped the nation. Yara's face was on every television screen, every newspaper front page. Italy watched the investigation unfold in real time. Hearts pinned on hope. When Fikri was arrested, many believed justice was finally near. So when he was cleared, the public felt the same gut punch as the investigators. And just like that, they were back at square one. The phone monitoring continued. So did the searches. But every new lead ended the same way, in silence. Then, exactly 3 months after Yara vanished, on February 26, 2011, the case took a haunting turn. A man from Cignolo d'Isola, a town just 6 miles from Brembate di Sopra, was out flying his remote-controlled plane in the countryside. When the aircraft malfunctioned, he was forced to land it in an overgrown field thick with tall grass. As he walked through the brush to retrieve it, something caught his eye, a bundle of what looked like discarded rags. But as he got closer, he noticed something else. Boots sticking out from beneath the pile. A call to police followed moments later. When officers arrived, they found a human body, badly decomposed, partially concealed beneath the rags. It was nearly unrecognizable. Yet when Detective Letizia Ruggeri arrived on scene, she didn't need confirmation. The clothing was unmistakable. It was what Yara had been wearing the day she disappeared. Nearby, scattered in the grass, were her iPod, house keys, SIM card, and the phone's removable battery. But the phone itself was gone. To lead the forensic investigation, authorities called in Italy's most respected pathologist. Her analysis confirmed what many feared. Yara had been killed by multiple stab wounds. There were no signs of sexual assault, but some of her clothes had been removed, leading investigators to suspect a possible sexual motive. And there was more. Forensic experts discovered a key clue on Yara's clothing. Microscopic fibers commonly found in a specific type of industrial fabric, materials typically used in specialized manufacturing. This pointed to a new theory. Yara's killer might work in a textile-related facility in the area. It wasn't the breakthrough they had hoped for, but it was something. And now, after 3 agonizing months, the real hunt for Yara's killer had finally begun. There was a glimmer of hope when forensic investigators discovered 2 foreign DNA samples, one on Yara's gloves, the other on the battery from her missing phone. But that hope faded quickly. The samples were too small, the genetic material too limited. Worse yet, no matches surfaced in any national or international databases. Just like that, the trail went cold again. Then, 2 months later, a breakthrough. Detective Letizia Ruggeri received a call that would change everything. During a meticulous re-examination of Yara's belongings, forensic specialists had uncovered biological material on her underwear. This time, they struck gold. A full male DNA profile, an unknown man, a likely killer. With a genetic fingerprint finally in hand, Letizia swung into action. She divided her team into specialized units. One group began collecting DNA samples from everyone in Yara's orbit. Relatives, neighbors, friends, coaches, even casual acquaintances at the gym. Another was tasked with sifting through the massive trove of cell phone data, focusing on numbers that traveled from Brembate di Sopra to Mapello on the night Yara vanished. Each of those individuals would also be asked to submit DNA, but the scale was enormous. The process was slow. Even with 3 labs across Italy working full-time, it could take years to test thousands of samples. And so the waiting began. Over the following months, the DNA samples piled up, but not one of them matched the killer's profile. Letizia knew they needed a fresh angle, something bold. Then she remembered something. Not far from where Yara's body had been discovered was a nightclub, one with a murky reputation, known for attracting rough crowds and people with criminal records. Letizia decided to test a theory. Killers often dispose of their victims in familiar places. What if the murderer had frequented that nightclub? She dispatched officers to stake out the club on Friday and Saturday nights. Each visitor was approached and asked for a DNA sample. Because the club required membership cards, the team also gained access to the database of past visitors, allowing them to track down and test individuals who'd walked through those doors months, or even years, before. The odds weren't promising, but Letizia had nothing else. Then, against all expectation, the lab called. They had a match, or almost. The DNA belonged to a man named Damiano. It matched the killer's profile, but only partially. That meant he wasn't the perpetrator himself, but he was almost certainly related. Investigators quickly ruled Damiano out. He had been abroad at the time of Yara's disappearance. But this partial match was a critical clue. The DNA on Yara's body almost certainly belonged to someone in Damiano's bloodline. The hunt now shifted focus from the suspect himself to his family tree. The idea of tracking a killer through a relative's DNA was almost unheard of in Italy at the time. Genetic genealogy was still in its infancy. Letizia and her team were navigating uncharted territory. They began painstakingly tracing Damiano's lineage, trying to identify every male relative who could potentially be the killer. That's when another twist surfaced. Damiano's mother had once worked as a housekeeper for none other than Yara's family. For 10 years, she had been inside their home, cleaning their rooms, folding their clothes. She had left the job just a few years before Yara went missing. When investigators informed her that someone from her own family might be connected to the murder, she was horrified. But even with that chilling revelation, the case dragged on. Months passed. Investigators ruled out Damiano's immediate family. That left the daunting task of expanding the search across hundreds, maybe thousands, of distant relatives, many of whom were scattered across Italy and beyond. Public opinion began to sour. As time wore on with no arrest, media outlets criticized the investigation. Talk shows speculated. Headlines questioned the competence of the police. Soon, politicians began to weigh in, calling for Letizia's removal from the case. But despite the growing pressure, she remained undaunted and more determined than ever. Despite the mounting pressure from the public and the media, Detective Letizia Ruggeri pressed on, relentless in her pursuit of Yara's killer. While critics questioned her methods, she and her team were quietly digging into the past, centuries into the past. They began tracing genealogical records dating as far back as 1716, meticulously building family trees from archived documents. It was an exhausting and often frustrating process, with thousands of names examined and countless dead ends. Then, in September 2011, a fragile thread of hope emerged. One of the family trees pointed to a man named Giuseppe, long deceased. It seemed like just another name among thousands, until they discovered that Giuseppe's widow had kept envelopes he had sealed with his saliva. Forensic analysts retrieved the DNA. The results were electrifying. Giuseppe was almost certainly the father or grandfather of the man whose DNA had been found on Yara's underwear. It was the most promising lead yet. Giuseppe had 2 sons, and both agreed to provide DNA samples. Letizia braced for the results, but the tests revealed yet another crushing disappointment. Although both men were closely related to the suspect, neither was the killer. Letizia was stunned. If Giuseppe's sons weren't a match, there was only one plausible explanation left. Giuseppe had fathered a child outside of his marriage, a child no one in the family knew about. That revelation took the investigation in a far more delicate and difficult direction. Detectives began quietly interviewing people who had known Giuseppe during his lifetime, asking if he might have had a secret relationship. It was a long shot, but nearly a year later, they caught a curious lead. Apparently, Giuseppe had spent 2 weeks every May, starting in the 1960s, at a spa in a small town near Milan. He always went alone. Never once did he bring his wife. Letizia immediately requested access to the spa's historical guest records. Incredibly, they still existed. Investigators pored over them, cross-referencing names of women who had stayed at the spa during the same periods as Giuseppe. It was a painstaking task that dragged on for over a year, but Letizia refused to give up. Still, no clear link emerged, and as word of the investigation spread, the public grew increasingly fascinated with the idea of Giuseppe's possible secret child. Italian journalists jumped into the hunt, chasing down stories of illegitimate children from small towns and decades-old affairs. In one tiny village alone, 5 such cases were uncovered. Despite all this noise, the real breakthrough didn't come until the summer of 2014. Among the flurry of tips and speculation, one name surfaced: Esther Arzuffi. Someone suggested she may have had an affair with Giuseppe. Letizia's team dug into their own records and made a surprising discovery. They had already collected a DNA sample from Esther 2 years earlier. At the time, the analysis had shown no connection between Esther and the unknown killer, but Letizia wasn't convinced. She ordered the sample reanalyzed. That decision changed everything. It turned out that a catastrophic error had been made. The original expert had mistakenly compared the killer's DNA to Yara's, not to Esther's. A second analysis, correctly done, confirmed the truth. Esther Arzuffi was the killer's mother. After nearly 4 years, Letizia finally had a name and a family. Esther had 3 children, including twins, a boy and a girl. On paper, they were the children of Esther's legal husband, but based on the DNA, it now appeared Giuseppe had fathered them in secret. And since the killer was male, investigators zeroed in on Esther's son. He was 42 years old at the time, a construction worker, married with children, living in none other than Mapello, the very town where Yara's cell phone had last signaled before going dark. The net was finally closing in. Detective Letizia Ruggeri knew the importance of discretion. If this man was indeed the killer, the last thing she could afford was to spook him. So she devised a clever plan to collect his DNA without raising suspicion. She discovered that he traveled the same road every day. With quiet precision, she arranged a routine sobriety checkpoint along his route. When the man was pulled over, he had no reason to be alarmed. He blew into the breathalyzer, unaware that the saliva left on the device would be rushed straight to the lab for DNA testing. After nearly 4 years of painstaking investigation, the result came back: a full match. The DNA found on Yara's underwear belonged to Massimo Giuseppe Bossetti. On June 16th, police made the arrest. Bossetti, a married father of 3 and a construction worker living in Mapello, the very town where Yara's phone last signaled, denied everything. He claimed total innocence, and so the case headed to trial. As prosecutors prepared, investigators unearthed disturbing evidence that painted a dark picture of Bossetti. His internet search history revealed troubling patterns, including material related to minors. Worse still, cell tower data placed his phone in Yara's hometown the evening she disappeared. But at 5:45 p.m., just before she was last seen, his phone was switched off. It wasn't turned back on until the following morning. Then came a critical piece of visual evidence. Surveillance footage from that same evening showed a car, without license plates, circling near the sports center where Yara was last seen. At the time, police couldn't identify it. Now they could. It was Bossetti's vehicle. And forensic tests revealed that fibers from the seats in his van matched fibers found on Yara's clothing. A witness from Yara's town also stepped forward. She told police that on the night of the disappearance, she had gone outside to take out the trash when she saw a car speeding past her house. It resembled Bossetti's vehicle. Inside, she said, was a child, and she heard screaming. Investigators also learned that Bossetti regularly stopped at a pizza restaurant on the same street where Yara lived. This suggested he may have been watching her for some time, possibly planning the abduction well in advance. Bossetti tried to explain the surveillance footage by saying he had simply been driving home from work, but his co-workers, phone records, and security cameras told a different story. He hadn't worked that day at all. The trial began in summer 2015, 1 year after his arrest. It instantly became a media sensation across Italy. Most of the public believed Bossetti was guilty, but what no one expected was the twist that the defense would deliver. The prosecution presented a clear theory. Bossetti had been stalking Yara, perhaps for weeks. On the evening she left the gym, he intercepted her, took her to the remote field where her body was eventually found, and murdered her. Their belief was that he may have intended to assault her, but something, fear, hesitation, or interruption, stopped him. Bossetti's wife testified that he was home with her and the children, eating dinner at the time of Yara's disappearance. But her account was contradicted by footage near the gym and by 3 independent witnesses who placed Bossetti's car in the area that evening. The defense maintained Bossetti's innocence. He insisted he had nothing to do with Yara's death. His lawyers claimed that he suffered frequent nosebleeds and proposed a far-fetched possibility: that someone else had come into contact with his blood and somehow transferred it to Yara's underwear. They also challenged the integrity of the DNA evidence itself. According to the defense, the sample found on Yara came from a type of DNA that mutates very slowly over generations, meaning it could theoretically belong to any distant relative of Bossetti's, not necessarily him. But forensic experts for the prosecution firmly rejected that argument. They testified that the DNA was a definitive match, not partial, not distant, but exact. The evidence, they said, left no room for doubt. But the defense had one final move, and it stunned the courtroom. Midway through the trial, Bossetti's lawyers shifted the spotlight onto a new figure. They named a surprising alternate suspect, a young gym instructor named Silvia. It was a bold accusation. After Yara's body had been recovered, forensic experts had reportedly found traces of Silvia's blood on the sleeve of Yara's jacket. That alone raised serious questions. Then came a curious admission from Silvia's father. He told investigators that the night Yara disappeared, Silvia had come home in tears and cried through the night. Investigators also discovered that Silvia had exchanged several messages with her brother that evening, but those texts were deleted shortly afterward. No record of their content remained. When questioned, Silvia claimed she couldn't explain her behavior that night. She said she had no memory of why she was crying, what she wrote to her brother, or how her blood ended up on Yara's clothing. In court, her answers were vague at best. Faced with direct questions, she simply replied, "I don't know." It was a strange, unsettling turn. Yet despite the mystery surrounding Silvia's involvement, her silence and the unclear circumstances were not enough to undermine the case against Bossetti. The DNA evidence remained the cornerstone of the prosecution's argument, and it was rock solid. In the summer of 2016, after years of investigation, speculation, and a trial followed by millions, Massimo Bossetti was found guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison. His legal team attempted appeals, but every effort to overturn the verdict failed. Then, another twist, this time personal. The very next day after the conviction, Bossetti's wife visited him in prison. There, in a devastating confession, she told him that none of their 3 children were biologically his. She admitted to having had affairs with multiple men over the years. The betrayal added yet another layer of tragedy to a case already mired in darkness. Even the family at the center of the investigation harbored secrets. DNA tests eventually confirmed that Esther's third child, the one not involved in the crime, was not fathered by her legal husband, nor by Giuseppe, the man believed to be Bossetti's biological father. The truth, it seemed, was messier than anyone could have imagined. Massimo Bossetti remains behind bars to this day, but questions still linger. The unresolved mystery of Silvia, her blood, her deleted messages, her emotional collapse, continues to haunt those who followed the case closely. For some, the anomalies surrounding her involvement are too unsettling to ignore. They argue that Bossetti may have been wrongly convicted, that perhaps the DNA evidence was mishandled or manipulated. Yet the overwhelming consensus remains. Every piece of evidence, collected, tested, and retested by some of Italy's most respected forensic experts, pointed to Bossetti. The investigation, though imperfect and clouded by twists, was thorough. The odds of a wrongful conviction, experts insist, are slim. Still, the Yara Gambirasio case stands as one of the most disturbing and high-profile criminal investigations in Italy's modern history. A haunting reminder of how evil can lurk in the most ordinary places, and how justice, no matter how delayed or contested, can eventually catch up. Share your thoughts on this story in the comment section. And don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching.